very quiet.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting here at Council Chamber, Bairnsdale Corporate Centre, 1st of May 2018. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcast to enhance the accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing the council will have their image, comments or submissions recorded. Please ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or on silent for the duration of the meeting. On behalf of Council, I'd like to acknowledge the Gunai-Kurnai people, the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. Item 1.2, do we have any apologies, Mr CEO?
We have two, Mr Mayor. We have Councillor White and Councillor Roberts, and we also have an apology from Ms Bennett, who is on another project. Thank you, Mr
CEO. Item 1.3 is declaration of conflicts of interest.
I've received nil, Mr Mayor.
Councillor.
Yes, I'd like to call a conflict of interest to the wood policy. The item number is
5.3.1.
5.3.1. Thanks very much for that.
Thanks, Councillor Pels. So item 1.4 is the confirmation of minutes. So it's moved Councillor Reeves, seconded Councillor Pels. Is there any questions? All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Our 1.5 is our next meeting of the Ordinary Council meeting. Will be Tuesday the 5th of June 2018 to be held at East Gippsland Shire Council, 55 Palmers Road, Lakes Entrance, commencing at 6 p.m. Item 1.6 is request for leave of absence, Mr CEO.
I've received nil.
Thank you. Item 1.7 is public question time.
We've got no public question time. There was a request from Malakuta regarding the dredge, but the person couldn't appear. But I will ask Mr Waits if he would answer that question, please. I know that it's just not unusual practice, but the person from Malakuta couldn't attend.
Certainly, thank you. Mr Waits, would you like to?
Oh, Mr Waits has a question.
Yes, councillors, we've had a member of the Malakuta community ring and ask when the channel to the Malakuta Ocean Access Boat Ramp would be dredged, because it's been silting up significantly over recent weeks in particular. Unfortunately, we've had the dredge out of action with quite a minor part, and we've been trying to source that for the last 4 weeks, and for various reasons it hasn't turned up. We expect that part was to turn up today. The tracking with the carrier showed that it was to turn up today. That will put the dredge operational within 24 hours, and we should be back into dredging this week. But we certainly acknowledge that the sand build-up has been quite significant, and at low tides the facility is not very usable. At other tides, boats are getting in and out okay, but it's not ideal the way it is, so we will be back into dredging the minute we can have that part back on the dredge.
Thank you, Mr Waits. Councillor Ellis.
Sorry, just a little bit of trouble with the switch. Mr Waits, does this build-up of sand place council at any risk, or, and more particularly and importantly, our members of the community that use that facility, does that place them at risk of either harm or financial damage? And second part of the question is, would it be prudent of council to close the ramp until we're able to effectively clear the ramp?
Councillor Ellis, there's signage at the site, at the ramp itself, that outlines the condition of the ramp. makes it clear that there is sand build-up, but as I stated earlier, the ramp is quite usable at various tides, just not at low tide. And there is an onus on boat operators to take heed of the warnings at the ramp and make their own assessment. Council's no different to any other boat ramp operator around the state or the country. There is no guarantee of access in and out of a facility like that. Obviously, we would like to see it accessible at all times, but there will be times where it won't be usable, and that's not uncommon for ocean access boat ramps.
Councillor Ellis. Yep.
Okay, so what it is, it's council's comfortable in maintaining 24 access to that ramp?
There's nothing to suggest it should be closed at the moment. The boat operators obviously need to be aware, and I've made it quite clear at low tides it's not usable at the moment. The water depth is very shallow, and there is always that risk coming back in after a day's fishing if you haven't taken note of the tides, that it will be very difficult to get back in. So, you know, there is a responsibility, as I've said, on boat owners to be aware of the tides, as most offshore boating operators are, and to make that judgment themselves. But obviously we would like it to be dredged, would have loved to have been dredged already. However, we have been waiting on this part for the dredge.
Councillor Pearls, you had a question?
Yes, I did. Just as a follow-up from my colleague Councillor Ellis's question, with what you've stated, Mr Waits, is there an onus on council to be monitoring and putting appropriate time usage on that ramp? I know you're saying it's up to the boat owner, but does council have any risk management in putting it out there stating that, that the ramp will be closed at this time and not available for use between these hours due to the tides? Is that something we need to do?
The message there at the ramp is broader than that. Obviously, tides change every day and quite significantly. We could do that. Is it required? I think the broad message there that outlines the issues with sand build-up and needing to take account of the tides is a reasonable risk management strategy.
Councillor Pearls.
Yep, sorry, with regards to that, I think it's appropriate for us to actually flag to the community that it's unavailable to be used during low tides, and I think a signage should probably be put up there in regards to that.
Mr Waits.
I'm certainly happy to have a look at the actual wording of the signage that's there at the moment, and if there's the ability to exclude certain hours of use, we can certainly put additional notification up there.
Warning of caution or something, I think it's probably a good idea.
But the notification we do use is, as I understand, consistent with what other similar facility operators would provide.
No worries, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Waits. Item 1.8.1 is Assembly of Councillors, and we have a recommendation there. Moved Councillor Reeves, seconded Councillor Pearls. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 1.9, Mr CEO, any petitions?
No petitions, Mr Mayor.
Item 2, notices of motion and or rescission.
We've received none, Mr Mayor.
So item 3 is deferred business.
3.1 is the East Gippsland Planning Scheme Amendment C126 implementation of the Bairnsdale Maritime Precinct Master Plan. Councillors, as you're aware, this will come back as a future report.
Mr CEO, do we have any view of when that might be?
I'd have to defer to Ms Nelson.
Councillors will have or should have seen an item, a memorandum being distributed to them today for information on the proposed revised approach that we're taking to this planning scheme amendment. We are in the process of talking with the affected landowners about an alternative way of achieving the strategic outcome that we're looking for without further impacting detrimentally on people's existing use rights. And we have provided, in the process of providing everyone with the opportunity to comment on that, with the intention of attempting to get this back to Council for consideration at the June Council meeting.
Thank you, Ms Nelson. Also, there was the document that was presented to us at one of our planning workshops with the strategic pieces of work that we're doing. Can that come to a councillor briefing soon?
Strategic piece of work?
The different amendments, strategic planning works.
Yes, that will definitely come back to council for a workshop.
Yeah. Thank you. Item 4 is councillor reports. Councillor Toohey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've lodged my report with council and I'll just briefly go through it. The 11th of April, I, along with yourself, went to the fundraising breakfast, Gippsland Rotary Centenary House, which was quite enjoyable. The 21st to the 4th, I went down with the pre-organised group down to Odyssey House, which was, I've got to say, very eye-opening. If nothing else, it was very, very eye-opening. It's very much other than what I thought it would be. Yeah, I'm still trying to go through just. It was very, very interesting indeed. Anzac Day, I attended the dawn service and the 10 o'clock service at Buchan South, which was very enjoyable. I do like going to those country settings because the morning tea is always spectacular. And then last Friday had our East Gippsland Shire Council Marina Consultative Committee meeting along with Councillor Ellis, and following that I actually shot out to the field days, which was reasonably quiet by the time I got out there, but lovely weather. Went out Saturday as well with my wife, and it was terrific. A really, really good show and highlighted our area, I thought, very, very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Toohey. Councillor O'Connell.
During April, some of the things that happened was the polypedal, which rode from Melbourne to Canberra. They stopped in at Omeo for the night, which was a great opportunity for some local community members to catch up with Tony Abbott and other MPs. And they also dropped into the CFA and men's shed. I attended both the dawn service and 11 o'clock service for the Anzac Day servicing Omeo, which was a terrific turnout, probably around 100 people at both. So well done to the Omeo RSL for organising that. And a couple of months ago, I spoke about a project that a group of Omeo citizens had been working on in retaining the Omeo CWA hall with the concept of creating and developing a community centre. And I'm pleased to report that we have heard back from the local CWA branch who have supported our idea and have given us the okay to use their building and trial this concept for the next 12 months. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Connell. Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Officers, councillors, my report is submitted for the record, but I want to dwell on one particular point. So I attended the Mayors and Councillors and CEOs Rural Councils Forum in Melbourne. And most interest at that forum was a chance to interact with Honourable Jarla Pulford and the Honourable Matthew Guy, and a good discussion around social enterprise and community leadership programs. Now, this is a particular interest to me because my business operation, we have 3 staff in 3 community leadership programs across Victoria. And I raised the issue of a variation in the costs of those community leadership programs and also the impediments of those costs, especially for social entrepreneurs who are often young and upcoming. And I thought that it was worth raising the question around just that, about that discrepancy between the costs and the impediments to young social entrepreneurs to access those programs. And one of my councillor colleagues is a participant in our Gippsland Community Leadership Program now, and we know how much we value those programs. I was buoyed as a result to hear the CEO of RDV, James Flintoff, announce, and it was probably in yesterday's budget, that there will be an alternative funding model to flatten that discrepancy and to allow accessibility across the state to community leadership programs. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I attended the Anzac Swift Creek Anzac, and the numbers were slightly down. However, it was quite a pleasant day. Also attended a tri-yearly meeting for the Castless Cemetery Reserve, and that was to just reform the committee and so forth, and that went quite okay. And they seem to, I've noticed this over the years, I've done quite a few of these things, and they all seem to run at about over $10,000 in the black. That's just coincidental, and I went to another one at Omeo shortly after that for the Historical Society, and they all seem to be in much the same position, you know, in the black to 10 plus. So that's about it for me. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Like my colleagues, I've prepared a written report, and like other councillors, I attended the Anzac Day ceremony, this time at Lakes Entrance, of course. A couple of things I just want to quickly, briefly mention outside my report, and the one is the considerable work being done by the volunteers at the newly erected men's shed at Lakes Entrance. Based on the Paynesville model, it's a real credit to the volunteers, which number in potential membership between 60 and 80 people. It's going to be a very well received project in Lakes Entrance once it's up and running, and I encourage councillors to have a look at the men's shed as they're travelling through. Following on the youth promotion point of view that Councillor Reeves mentioned, I'd like to mention a great experience I had today. Members of the Lakes Entrance Secondary College ran a fundraising event for the Lakes Entrance Surf Club at their school, and young leaders such as Elise and her colleague were able to raise over $420 from a function at their school. Often, you know, we're down in the depths, you know, worrying about the future of our youth, but the efforts of these young people was very inspiring, and I look forward to hearing more of that particular VCAT year. And finally, I would like to just touch on attending the similar meetings that Councillor Reeves referred to, and the inspiration that was taken from that rural councils meeting, and also the more relevant recycling briefings that I've attended in Melbourne on behalf of council. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I too have a report for our ladies over there, and I'll forward it on directly. I just wanted to say we're well into autumn now and still no sign of significant rain for our region, and I noted on the way to council here today on the blackboard there near the Lucknow Oval, there's someone's subscribed, are we all able to, let's all do a rain dance? And I thought, well, that's very appropriate, because in other areas they have done that, and maybe it's something we should be thinking of. But I note that our farmers are all going into stress mode because they're selling off their cattle and they haven't got enough feed to feed their animals stored. So it is a stressing time for our community out there, and the fact that the field days are on has been entertaining, but I don't think there'll be a lot of economic stimulus from what's been generated out there, what was at the field days, because I know the farmers are hurting, and you know, it's a significant time for them. So I think a bit more of drought relief would be something that will be soon coming to our region. I'd like to state Aslan Jones was the guest speaker at the 6 a.m. dawn service, and she's our Junior Australia Day reciprocant, and she did an outstanding speech between Olympic athletes and the commitment and similarities of elite athletes towards the dedication and commitment of soldier training. And she was very humble in saying, whilst a gold medal for an athlete was of significance. It doesn't come in any comparison to the war medals that these guys have brought home or achieved in their time, and it was an absolutely fantastic tribute. And when I spoke to her afterwards, I said, did someone give you a handwriting that? And she said, no, I wrote it all on my own. And I thought it was just outstanding. She'd written about 6 long pages. We were sort of all captivated for probably a good 15 minutes. And I just thought, you're going to be a great leader in future years to come. I can't wait for you to grow up and be a female leader in our community. I was really inspired and really proud of her. I then attended, there was probably about 3,500 people maybe at the Bairnsdale morning. I'm not sure about numbers, but it was a big crowd. I then went on to the 11 o'clock service at Bairnsdale, and I was delighted to see they had 14 mounted light horsemen there, and I refer back to there was a funding source that they were after, a grant that I think we might have sponsored for them at some stage, and I was delighted to see them all there with their beautiful hat plumage and their jodhpurs and things on, and their full uniforms, and they were riding really proudly on their lovely horses. And they had been to Orbost at the 6 o'clock service, the 10 o'clock service at I think it was Bruthen, and then they were at the 11 o'clock service at Bairnsdale, so they certainly got themselves around. They weren't travelling all that time, but...
There wasn't an 11 o'clock service at Bairnsdale, it's 9 o'clock.
At Bairnsdale, no, it was in 11. Meetung I was at, sorry, I do apologise, I was at Meetung. And they were at the 11 o'clock service there, and then they had to delay it slightly because they had scheduled the planes to fly over at 11:45, and they had to delay the service a bit. But all in all, that was well supported by the community and a lot of local interested people. So it was a really nice day. And lastly, I'd just like to state a formal thank you for the flowers that were sent to myself and my family about the loss of my mother. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearls. Thank you, councillors. I have a couple of items from the report that I'd like to just quickly mention. The first one was an event, the East Gippsland Inaugural Food, Wine and Beer Festival. And why I'd like to speak about this is the connection of the food and our provenance of food for our region, the link to our cafes, restaurants and other food-related businesses in building a brand in our region of distinction and desire for consumers. This inaugural event was a huge success with close to 2,000 people attending. This event had something for everyone and was certainly a family-friendly focused event. It offered relaxed and tempting atmosphere for foodies, wine connoisseurs, beer enthusiasts and everything in between. I'd like to thank Aaron and Evan from the Dutch Oven for having their vision of a regional showcase of our produce on the East Gippsland hospitality industry, highlighting growth and opportunity through collaboration. Aaron and Evan worked with restaurants, vineyards and breweries from across Victoria and showcased some of the best produce and products available. The most innovative, award-winning cool climate winemakers, artisan food producers, creative award-winning chefs showcased an incredible offering of assorted food, wine and beer to all who attended. During the same week, Richard Cornish, renowned food journalist, conducted a Q&A session at Lindonay called Food for Thought. Sponsored by the East Gippsland Food Cluster, the Q&A session panellists were all successful local producers, and they reinforced the importance of collaboration in building and strengthening a regional brand of product of provenance. Also, during that week, ABC Gippsland rural reporter Isabella Pittaway featured a story relating to award-winning Peruvian chef Alejandro Saravia, who had recently opened a new restaurant in Melbourne called Farmer's Daughter. This restaurant has a strong marketing emphasis on only sourcing produce from Gippsland for its restaurant. Alejandro was asked what sets Gippsland producers apart from the rest. Gippsland is a slice of heaven on earth. The diversity of the region, its microclimates means Gippsland can grow almost every fruit, vegetable, and at the same time, it has the right conditions to breed the best pasture-fed livestock. It is the most important dairy region in Australia, and wild catch fish one of the major ports in Victoria's Lakes Entrance. The next item I'd like to briefly mention is in relation to East Gippsland's ZCG antennas being awarded a Australian Defence contract. I attended this official announcement at Lindenow, where ZCG are based. And they were awarded a significant supply contract to supply part of a technology designed to keep troops safe from explosions in the field. The locally made antennas are a critical component for the suite of robust troop protection devices, specifically designed for use by the Afghanistan National Defence and Security Forces. The ZCG team, in partnership with Australian Defence, developed antennas that block radio frequency transmissions to enemy combatants that can't remotely trigger improvised explosive devices. This ZCG technology antenna plays an important role in keeping the troops safe from IEDs. This is another example of a great East Gippsland business acting locally, thinking globally. It's also interesting to note that ZCG participated in business training sponsored by East Gippsland Shire several years ago around Grow Your Business and Consultants Optum in relation to lean manufacturing principles. These lean manufacturing principles are designed to help businesses drive unnecessary cost out of their workflows and assist them in producing nationally and internationally competitive products. And lastly, the Australian Citizenships was a great event. Particularly special to me as my parents Pietro and Carmela took their pledge to become Australian citizens some 60 years ago. So every time I hold one of these events, it is quite an endearing event for me to participate. And through our civic events team, namely David Radford, we were able to conduct an individual ceremony at a citizen's house that was unable for health reasons to make it down to the corporate centre that day. I know that was greatly appreciated, so thank you, David. Again, it was rewarding to see the pride and the sincere thanks in our endeavours in making this happen. The event at the Corporate Centre created another key milestone for our organisation. We utilised our investment in technology to live stream the citizenship event around well, everywhere. There was 8 different countries involved with this latest citizenship, and it gave people participating for their family and friends the opportunity to come and have a look via the internet connection and watch and be part of that important ceremony for their family and friends taking part in that. I must also congratulate our East Gippsland staff members, Swathi Kartik Venkatraman and Robert Pringle for taking the final step in becoming Australian citizens. Thank you. Item 5 is officers' reports, and item 5.1.1, East Gippsland Shire Council Grants Program Round 2, 2017-2018. And we have Mr Wayne Richards in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors would be familiar with the Community Grants Program. It's the mechanism that's used to provide financial support to community organisations for a broad range of initiatives in a fair and equitable manner. There's an annual budget of $161,000 across community projects and the arts and heritage streams, which includes the administrative costs, and this is the second of 2 rounds. With round 2, there was a high level of uptake, so there was 55 applications, requesting a total of $210,000. The panel has recommended 24 of these applications, which is an allocation of $67,614. This is slightly above the budgeted amount, but councillors would note a request to increase the budget for the arts and heritage grants, which is to be offset by an increase to the Forge Theatre hire income. So in a sense, it's budget neutral as it's related to a Forge Theatre hire. There were some non-compliant applications, but in general, the quality of the applications was really good. And as you read from the notes, there's some fantastic projects that were applied for. Feedback will be provided to all unsuccessful applicants, including those that were non-compliant around their reasoning. So the recommendations and an overview of the grants received and recommended are attached, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Richards. Any questions, councillors? So Councillor Pels is moving recommendation as a motion, and a seconded Councillor Toohey. Would you like to speak, Councillor Pels?
I'd just like to say the grants funding programs are always great for the community. They often present an in-between funding, which is great to get better initiatives off the ground for our clubs and things in the region. They're really important to these communities, and it's a great honour to be able to assist them in some way. Thank you.
Councillor Toohey, would you like to speak as a second? Councillor Reeves.
Yeah, I'd like to just note a couple of things that there's a considerable leverage and multiplier effect of the grants that we should note there, and also that there are many people and many organisations who have applied, and when you read through the depth and detail of their applications, I'd just like, on behalf of the councillors, to note and thank all of those people who have gone to the effort of applying, and they shouldn't be deterred, and I'm very glad to hear that we will provide that feedback and that encouragement for those applicants in future, because the value socially and financially and the multiplication effect of those grants is significant.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Is there any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 5.2.1 is a proposal to end Section 173 Agreement AF 811110G as it relates to PC 375513 at 4 Green Court, Eagle Point. And in attendance we have Mr Hollow.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, this report is seeking a decision of Council for in-principle support for landowners requesting the Section 173 Agreement in relation to 4 Green Court, Eagle Point. The parent property that created 4 Green Court had a 6-dwelling townhouse proposal approved in 2004 and a subsequent subdivision of the proposed townhouses into 6 lots the following year. There was a requirement of the subdivision to ensure that the land was developed in accordance with the townhouse permit that was approved. Councillors, the landowner has purchased 2 of those lots and has consolidated those lots, and it is now known as 4 Green Court. They have provided advice to Council. They do not wish to proceed with the townhouse development, and they wish to build a single dwelling on the property. We believe this end outcome, if approved, would be a good outcome, as it will allow for the 35% garden area as introduced into the General Residential Zone 2017 to be provided. The dwelling will be able to respond to current flood levels as opposed to flood levels from 2004. And if the dwelling exceeds 7.5 metres, it will be able to be considered under the Design Development Overlay Schedule 14 through a planning permit process. Councillors, on that basis, there's a recommendation for in-principle support for the ending of the agreement, and then the second necessary step of public consultation before returning to the chamber for a decision. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr Hollow. Questions, councillors? This is recommendation. Do we have a move? Move, Councillor Toohey. You have a seconder? Yep. Councillor O'Connell. Thank you. Any speakers? Councillor Toohey.
Thanks, Aaron. Look, that just is normalising something that occurs down in that area every day, and I'm more than happy to see this come through. It fixes an issue that was never going to be addressed otherwise. So, happy to.
Thank you, Councillor Toohey. Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you.
Councillor Pels has declared a pecuniary interest in the next...
Conflict of interest?
Conflict of interest.
Yep. So item 5.3.1 is a council policy, East Gippsland Shire Council Timber Encouragement Policy, and we have Mr John Morton in attendance. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillors, as you'll be aware, following the council election back in 2016, all policies were to be reviewed as part of council's ongoing policy program review. The timber encouragement policy before you aims to encourage the use of timber and timber-related products as a preferred material for construction purposes in the fit-out of council buildings and potential infrastructure projects where appropriate. The policy aims to support economic activity in the timber industry and the associated industries of logging and construction through the utilisation of timber products, which is known as a carbon-friendly product across council projects. East Gippsland's estimated total regional output is approximately about 3.5 billion, and the timber industry makes up 138 million of that, which is about 4%. So it's a significant industry within the region. The policy before you has been reviewed, and there's only some minor formatting changes in the document, and it's before you for your consideration today. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Morton. Questions from councillors? Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you. We often hear from the Greens that the timber industry is heavily subsidised. Well, if one was to look at these figures here, we'd have to dispute that, wouldn't we? Have you done any figures on what the timber subsidies may be, say for Gippsland, for instance, or what are we dealing here with East Gippsland as in comparison to what's earned? Because I can remember years ago, in my time at a place called Starvation Creek, and in the early 50s, where the camp accountant, he used to boast that it was the Forest Commission was one of the very few instruments of government that returned money to the consolidated revenue. Would we have any figures on that sort of thing? Because I think that you know, those sort of claims by the Green or environmental movement, whichever you like to call it, in my view, they would be false. Have we got any figures on that? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Mr Holton, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, just by saying, happy to take that question on notice, Councillor Buckley, but the timber encouragement policy isn't around, it's not a policy that's directed at any particular political party, but we would not have that information to hand right now. So, but we're more than happy to provide you with an answer to your question in the future.
Thank you, Mr Holton. Any further questions? Councillor Ellis.
No, I have no question, but I'm happy to foreshadow moving the motion, the recommendation,
yep,
should that be necessary.
So if there's no further questions, Councillor Ellis has moved the motion. Do we have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Buckley. Would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Ellis.
Council has long had a position of supporting the timber industry as a sustainable industry in East Gippsland. The processes and the policy outline council's wish to maintain a sustainable and carbon neutral position as a leader within the community. Once again, I commend the recommendation to council.
Thanks, Councillor Ellis. Are there any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 5.
To get Councillor Pearls back in. He's got the money on.
Thank you, Councillor Pearls. Item 5.3.2 is a report on the Audit Committee meeting held on the 24th of April 2018, and we have Kaya Cashman in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm here today to present this report in the absence of the Director Corporate, Ms Mary-Ann Bennett. The Audit Committee of Council met on the 24th of April, and the report from that particular meeting is with you. Just to highlight the main Just to highlight the main matters that were actually discussed at that meeting. Firstly, we had an internal audit update from Mr Stephen Tillman of Oakton Services regarding our ICT and BCP audits that were recently undertaken. There is still a little bit of work to do there from management's perspective, primarily around the fact that the business continuity plan had only recently been completed and we're still to do some further testing. The internal audit ambit plan was also presented to the committee where we highlighted to them the areas of audit that we considered were important. This will obviously be discussed with the incoming auditing firm that we're about to engage. And from that, our 2018 to 2021 internal audit plan should be framed. The finance and capital work reports will be presented following this particular report by Ms Liz Collins and Ms Marlene Batista, I believe. So I won't provide any commentary on that at the moment. The Audit Committee terms of reference was also presented to the Audit Committee. We took the time to actually revisit that document to incorporate the amendments that will be coming through from the Local Government Act. Primarily there will be a change of name from the Audit Committee to the Audit and Risk Committee, and the terms of reference which the Audit Committee currently acts under, will now be called the Audit and Risk Committee Charter. The following matter that was also discussed was a request from the Audit Committee to undertake a performance evaluation assessment following their internal audit that they prepare each year. Officers went away and did some investigation with like councils to scrutinise their current process and the framework that they use to evaluate their own performance. And it was led to believe that there wasn't any significant changes that needed to be made. And so hopefully they'll be adopting the same type of process for this year's evaluation. The asset revaluation methodology report was also provided, the committee noting with that this was quite a comprehensive piece of work that was performed by council officers. This report actually outlines how we will be undertaking the asset revaluation process that's due for completion this year. And finally, the local government bill, the governance and compliance coordinator gave the committee an update on the current review that's being undertaken there. And the committee are welcoming further feedback from council and supporting them through the process, as there will be a slight change to the operations of the audit committee once this local government bill has been fully acted upon. So without any further ado, I seek that you note that the audit committee report presented. I'm happy to field any questions should you need any further assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Cashman. Any questions, councillors? Do we have a recommendation? Moved Councillor Reeves. Do we have a seconder for the motion? Seconded Councillor Buckley. Any speakers?
Yes, Mr Mayor, of course. Just note the assiduous and tenacious nature of that audit committee, and we're very grateful for that work. And I'd just like it on the record, the comments from that audit committee who noted an ongoing improvement in reduction in outstanding items despite new enrolling matters appearing as would be expected. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Reeves. No. There's no further speakers. I'll put the motion. All those in... I'd like to speak against the motion? Or?
No, I'd like to speak in favour that we actually write a thank you to the external auditors for their time on the work that they've done for our council in the 4-year time.
External or internal? The internal auditors are the ones that have just...
Yes, they're our internal auditors.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pels.
We'll take that note.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, Ms Cashman. Item 5.3.3 is the finance report for the 9 months with the period ending the 31st of March 2018. And in attendance we have Ms Liz Collins. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This report is for the first 9 months of the current financial year in terms of our financial performance against the year-to-date result, as well as a forecast end-of-year result. The report provides details in the appendices in terms of the summary statements and notes to the key variances, both year-to-date and for the full year, against the adopted budget and year-to-date budget. At this stage, it's forecast that there would be an additional operating surplus of approximately $559,000, and that's a result of a number of items, but primarily the result of the timing for capital income. We've received an additional $1.3 million of capital grant funding for seawalls at Lakes Entrance. There's been the timing of the Bairnsdale Aquatic Centre development grant in terms of that lining up with the timing of the works, and there's also been some funding that's been provided for bridges in 2017-18 that was planned in 18-19 from council funds. So bringing all those into account and taking into account the timing of the capital works program in terms of the end of year cash position, overall the financial result for the third quarter is in line with what we would expect and what we had planned in our adopted budget for 17-18. There is a recommendation there, Mr Mayor, for council's consideration.
Thank you, Ms Collins. Questions, councillors? Councillor Pels.
Yes, I'd just like to say there was nothing written in this. Whilst we've finally seen the figures come out about the Raymond Island Ferry, I think it's remiss of it not to be summarised in the executive report. And I think it's actually something that comes up in the figures, but it's not actually highlighted, and I feel that it should be, given the cost blowout of it. So I'm wondering whether there's opportunity for us to note this report but not adopt it.
Councillors, you asked us to do a report, and that's what is being undertaken, to report back to council. So that work is being undertaken right at this point. So if, and that's what was requested.
Okay, Mr CEO, can we just have a clarification? The report that you're talking about is the, it's a forensic assessment on the cost blowout of the Raymond Island Ferry of $2 million.
Well, that's an incorrect statement just there. The $2 million is an incorrect statement. What occurred was that we are now getting an assessment done on the procurement of that and how some of those blowouts on the operational cost of the ferry, and that's what was requested, and that was to come to council. So I think your comments are preemptive, that we were doing the work that has been already requested from council.
Councillor Ellis, you had a question?
I'm just a little confused. That report that Councillor Peltz is asking, wouldn't that come from the auditors in the audit report?
That's correct, and that's what you've requested, that we have an audit report come through that, and that's the process that's been undertaken as requested. Yeah. But we're doing exactly what was requested by council, and that's to come into the next audit report.
In the next audit report, so we can expect something in the June report to council?
That's what we're aiming for, thank you.
Councillor Pels.
The next audit doesn't happen until July, after the end of the financial year.
Councillor, I think if you recall, this is not an audit report, this is an internal audit, initial internal audit regarding it. It's not the audit, it's not the full audit, it's the audit on the Raymond Island Ferry.
Okay, thank you, Mr CEO. For clarification of what we've got here, the figures actually show up in this quarterly, in this 9-month period report. We've been waiting to see the final figures, and they're showing up publicly now. The bottom line is, for the community to accept, we have asked for officers to do a forensic assessment and a review of what has gone on with the ferry costings, as we feel they're exorbitant, and I think it's council's responsibility to request a further investigation into it, which the CEO has obliged us with, and we look forward to seeing that report as soon as possible and by the end of June. Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Reeves.
Happy to move this recommendation, Mr Mayor.
So you've moved, Councillor Reeves. Do we have a seconder? Councillors. Councillor Toohey, thank you. Speakers?
Look, this is an interim report, and there are fluctuations, of course, in operational matters that are beyond our control. And the good thing about this council and our management of it is that we have the capacity to ride out those variations, and that's what good management allows us to do, councillors.
Is there any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried. 6-1, thank you. Thank you, Ms Collins. Item 5.3.4 is the Capital Works and Landfill Rehabilitation Projects Report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2018. Mr Waits.
Thank you, councillors. The report before you outlines capital expenditure and progress with the Capital Works program for the final financial year up until the end of the third quarter, end of March. The adopted budget for Capital Works and major landfill rehabilitation projects, including carryovers, was $45.2 million. As you'll see in this report, as of the end of March, actual expenditure plus commitments, as in contracts already awarded, totaled nearly $36.23 million, so 80% of the total budget. Equally pleasing, if you look on the next page of the report, is out of 171 projects, 156 or 90% of projects have either been delivered or on track for being delivered as per the program. So things are tracking very well against the proposed program and against the proposed budget. Councillors, I'm quite happy to take questions.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Ellis.
Yeah, I'm just having trouble. Thanks, Chris. Mr Waits, at the Rural and Regional MAV Forum last week, councils were warned by the Chief Executive Officer of the MAV to take note of the Ombudsman's inquiry into the Wodonga City Council and to the application of funds raised under the municipal charge for the management of waste services in their particular council. The basic allegation was that the full sum of the monies raised was not allocated to landfill and collection services and was directed elsewhere. Am I reading correctly when I read this report? It tells me that we are on track to fulfil using the entire amount of our municipal fees raised under our municipal waste charge for solely the municipal waste management.
Councillors, obviously waste collection charges, I don't think it was a municipal charge they were talking about, it was the waste collection charges and waste fees. As I understand it with Wodonga, their issue was more closely related to the curbside collection charge and the use of that charge, because there was a suggestion some of that money being collected for waste purposes was not being allocated to waste functions. I can guarantee you that the most recent assessment that was done of our waste operations is council still run at a deficit, so we do not collect more money than we actually use on waste management. So I don't believe we are in the same position that Wodonga has experienced.
Thank you, Mr Waits.
First time. Thanks for that, Mr Waits. It's an important matter because it was flagged that the Ombudsman would be looking at all Victorian councils in relation to the way in which we manage our fees coming in for waste management.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Buckley, you had a question.
Thank you. Is there any sort of restriction on how much we can put this up, like the rate cap? it's part of our rates. The collection fee, waste collection fee. Could some people assume that that's got the same cap on it, the 2.5? How does that sort of align with it, you know, as part of our overall rate tax?
Councillor, waste fees and charges aren't subject to the rate capping limit of 2.5%. The draft budget put before you, and that's out for public comment at the moment, has on average, I think, 4% increases for waste charges. So it's not subject to the rate cap, no.
Is there anywhere in the Act that covers that? The Local Government Act? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Buck.
Councillor, I'd have to take that specific question on notice, but I would have confidence in our finance department that we have the ability to raise waste charges beyond the rate cap, yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? There's a recommendation before us. Just need a thank you, Councillor Ellis. Have a seconder, Councillor O'Connell. Is there any speakers for that item?
No, there's no need to speak to this.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you. So item 6, Mr CEO, is there any urgent business?
No urgent business, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is definitely not urgent business, but that's what I want to talk about. If we could have a motion to just discuss this matter, that we change the name from urgent business, because that's a bit over the top, I think, in our role of dealing with things generally, and we use that simple term as general business, as it used to be in the past. And that's what I would like the council to just move a motion that we discuss this as a motion, that the urgent word be changed to general. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, so you foreshadowed that motion, have you, Councillor Buckley? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I just had.
Do we have a seconder for the foreshadowed motion?
Yeah,
Councillor Buckley's democratic right to put forward motions. I'll go as a happy seconder for the discussion and receive the comments either for or particularly against.
So that's been seconded by Councillor Ellis. Speakers, Councillor Buckley.
Well, it's very brief, and I have really nothing much to add, except that I feel that it's a much broader and much more acceptable part of the agenda to call it a general business, because urgent to some people is not very urgent to others, and general, it's just somebody's just clutched that out of the sky. So thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. We'll ask Kaya to give us some clarification on that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Buckley. I understand that this is obviously the first time that this motion has been put forward, but could I possibly recommend that we actually look back at our local law, particularly meeting procedure local law, to see whether or not that would need amendment should this motion be approved. Thank you.
If I may, just may speak there. It's only of recent times, in the last 6 months perhaps, that we've changed, that I've noticed a change in our agendas to the word urgent. Previously it had been the words urgent and other business, and for my knowledge it had been that for at least a decade. Now there might be some reason that they changed and can offer that to the consideration. I have no.
Thank you. So the suggestion was that we get some more time to have a look at it properly before we vote on anything?
Yeah. So I'll bring an amendment to the motion that the matter be adjourned until the ordinary meeting of whatever date it is in June.
Yeah. So it's moved and seconded by Councillor Reeves, moved by Councillor Ellis.
Could I have another question, brief question? Would this require, we'll wait till what happens next month, I suppose, but does this require a notice of motion to bring it on next month? Thank you.
So the amendment has been moved that we hold it over to the June meeting. It's been moved and seconded. Yeah, so that we get the information before we have to make any decisions. All those in favour of the amendment? Against? The amendment now becomes a motion. All those in favour of the motion? Against? It's carried. Thank you. Now we have item 7 is a contractual matter. Councillor
Mayor,
Reeves.
I'm happy to move that we close the meeting to the public in accordance with the provisions of Section 82D of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider item 7.1 as this item relates to contractual matters.
Yep, thank you. Seconded Councillor Ellis. All those in favour? Against? It's carried.